welcome to VIA's Support Raising Podcast. We're excited to bring you a special series that is pulled from recordings related to our Support Raising Leaders Conference in 2026. These are our workshop speakers and their expert level content, but we wanted to pull out some of the specific topics and speakers because their content applied to such a broader audience, and we didn't want you to miss out.
I'm your host today, Mark Wilson. I'm part of the Via Generosity team, and today I'm joined by Ian Hsu. And Ian is the founder and CEO of Prayvine. It's a ministry that provides mission workers with a free, secure platform for multiplying their prayer support. He's passionate about building strong prayer-centric relationships between workers and their ministry partners. And prior to founding Prayvine, Ian led Stanford University's digital engagement strategy team. So an expert on many, many levels. Ian, we were talking a little bit, and I thought it might be a great way to start our podcast off if you could tell us how you got called into ministry and what that looked like.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing is I didn't get called into this ministry because I was good at prayer or because I was passionate at prayer. God called me into this ministry because I was bad at prayer and at praying for missionaries in particular. So some years ago, my wife and I, we've supported many missionaries for many years. I always had an interest in missions. And during one week in 2012, God kind of gave me conviction 2 times in the same week. So the first time, we had some friends who were Bible translators from Asia. We went to college with them, had supported them for a long time. They came back on furlough, and my wife's like, "Oh, we have to see them, you know?" I was like, yeah, that's great. Let's go see them. And the moment I saw them in the fellowship hall at church, the first thing that went through my mind was, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know you had kids. I can't remember the last time I prayed for you. Like, I know so little about what you do. Yes, we had the automatic monthly giving set up, but I had this sense that, like, wow, I had really missed out. I could have been so much more involved in what God was doing through them, which was amazing. Like, there's some issues I wasn't getting their newsletter or whatnot, but like, yeah, I just really had this sense that I could have been more invested in what God was doing. Then later that same week, we had other missionary friends. Again, we went to college with them, and they sent out this email saying that they were going to take these youth who they work with in Indonesia to an island set aside for orphans, and these youth were going to love on orphans for a week. And so I got excited. You know, I gave some money so they could sponsor more kids to go on this trip. And the thing is, I started praying every day, and I realized, like, wow, this is the most exciting thing ever. I can't wait to find out what God was going to do. I was growing in my understanding of God's love for orphans, for Indonesian youth, his love for me. And I had this kind of realization that this should be the normal Christian experience of missions for every single believer, is this ongoing, deep, active participation in what God's doing, especially through prayer. And so, yeah, that's how God called me into this. I've been at this for a little over 12 years now, and it's been the honor of my life to serve missionaries.
That's great. I was thinking your call is partner driven. Like, you know, a lot of things are mission, like they're generated out of mission agencies or, you know, but it was driven by your desire to participate at a higher level. And that's really cool of them. And thanks for saying that. Well, we're going to talk about the topic today. We're going to talk about why healthy communication is so important. And you may have had a title for that. Do you remember what your title is for this set of content?
Yes. The title was something like communicating with ministry partners, research and best practices. That's
Great. So some of what Ian brings is a tremendous overview of what's working and what's not working. And he uses data in a way that helps us see what is connecting. And I think that's super important. But we might want to step back a little bit. I mean, and you shared it connects back to your testimony, but why is healthy communication with partners so important? Like, I mean, you know, there are plenty of people who go, and there are partners who are really glad to invest, and it maybe doesn't always go beyond that, but like what about communication is significant that could help?
Yeah. So I'm going to bring kind of a different lens to that question, because
Okay.
oftentimes in the MPD world, we talk about communication in the context of like it's a way to build relationships and to
Mhm.
build partnership, right? I want to bring like a theological view to this.
Okay.
And basically, as I've thought about this more and more, I am convinced that communication is important because it results in prayer, which is, I believe, the most powerful requirement for the fulfillment of the Great Commission, and it unlocks worship. It unlocks testimony about who God is, what he's doing, and his heart for the world. And so let me kind of paint a little bit, go into a little bit more detail on what
Mhm.
I mean there. So oftentimes it's easy to view kind of MPD and the relationships that we have with our supporters as being kind of transactional rather than discipleship, right? Like,
Mhm.
will you invest in what God's called me to do so I can go do this thing,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to God has given us this chance to do something together and to grow in our own discipleship and our walk with Jesus. And I think like communication in particular unlocks the prayer part of this, because if you don't communicate, you're not going to receive prayer, right? And as people pray, God answers. And this is something I've seen over and over.
Mhm.
If you're not communicating your prayer needs, people aren't praying, but when you do, God answers. And um, as God answers, then you communicate again, right? You testify to what God has
Mhm.
done. And out of that comes worship, right? And so, like, you have this cycle where you're inviting people to pray in particular. Prayer brings God's power into the work that you're doing. People see that and they say, like, wow, like I got to be involved in what God's doing. Let's worship God together. And to me, that is the most beautiful part of communication. Yes, if you communicate well, you're more likely to, keep your funding, you're inviting
Mhm.
people into God's work, but like from God's perspective, for his children to call on him more, for him to show off what he can do more, for him to win battles and receive praise and glory and worship, like to me, that's what is super exciting about communication, because that's what can happen.
Yeah. What a great vision you're painting there. I mean, and you can see the passion, like it just oozes out of you for this. And I mean, it really elevates the game, doesn't it? Like it's not a tool. It's the chief end. I mean, like it, right? Like it's what we're about. And that's great. I heard someone else just quote this week that when the rich young ruler came, he asked the Lord, what do I need to do? And this person's summation was he didn't want just his money or him just to give it. He wanted the rich young ruler. He wanted his heart to be given over. And he said, don't forget about the discipleship of the person you're partnering with. Like, and that's what you're saying in essence is like, don't forget that this is a part of their growth and their worship. And that's beautiful. That's really great. Great. What, anything else spurred on there as you think about that?
Um, no, you're right. I am pumped.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah. I'm glad. I mean, I'm excited all of a sudden to go back and communicate because I think sometimes it can be, as a support raiser myself, sometimes I can feel like I have to do this or it's important and I need to communicate well. But again, it just brings me new energy to be like, I get to do this, and what I'm doing is I'm inviting people to worship with me, and that's really new. It's new inspiration. So I know what I know about you over the last 7 years, Ian, is that you do your homework. Like you track things and you make sure that what you're doing is based in actual data and how things are impacting. You're not trying to sell something. You're more demonstrating what's working. So as you've tracked all that stuff, like what's some research? What can you tell us about what you've learned?
Yeah, so we have data from a few different places, right?
Okay.
Like on the platform itself, we are seeing how people are asking for prayer. We're seeing, how people are responding, like what is what results in engagement, what results in prayer. So we have that kind of behavioral data. And then we also do a lot of kind of qualitative data. We've surveyed hundreds of supporters of missionaries and asked them, like, yeah, what do you want to hear about? What gets you excited about the missionary who you're supporting? And so we have a lot of data on a lot of different things. Maybe one place to start would be data on what kind of content, what kind of information, right, is most motivating, most exciting to ministry partners. And the thing that I find super interesting is at least 2 or 3 times more exciting than the next categories are first personal prayer requests, not even like what, prayer requests for ministry, but like, how are you doing, and then secondly, ministry prayer requests. Those are, it's like an order of magnitude more important to ministry partners than, the things that telling stories about, answers to prayer requests, that's number 3. And that makes a lot of sense. But like a lot of stuff, we spent a lot of time talking about things like, oh, this is the cultural context and like, trying to encourage people or whatever. But really it's the prayer requests that people value.
It's an interesting, like you said, it's an interesting finding, because often I think as missionaries, maybe even it's what we train, like, keep your personal stuff limited, right? Because they're joining for the vision. But I find that really engaging. It's intriguing to me. Like, I wonder do you have any reasons like why that is? Like that's the most engaged thing that they want to participate in?
I have theories.
Okay.
And I think the first reason I think is like, that's how God built us, right? Like God created people to be relational and to care for one another, especially people in the body of Christ, right? And so there is something that, and I find this so interesting, right? Like people get so excited to pray for a missionary when they're sick. We see this a lot. They receive the most prayer like for when they're sick or when their family's going through a hard time, even more than the people they're serving. Now, people are also very, like, they're kind of neck and neck, but there's something about like God created us to be relational and to care for one another. And that's where we derive joy, right? And so I think that's part of it. Another part of it is just like, I think as workers, we don't realize often like how much people love us and how deeply they care about us. And it's easy sometimes with some of the tools, right? Like if you're using MailChimp, the main thing you get to see are open rates, right? And you're like, most people tell me, oh, my open rate's like 20%. And, that's kind of discouraging. But the fact of the matter is the people who are supporting you and are part of your team of partners, they love you. And I think this is expressed in the extent to which they care to hear personal prayer requests.
And I'm so humbled, like, as you say that, to think about, people that love me and care about me. That's really fascinating. I'm experiencing this emotionally too, as you talk about it, which is great. The thought I had, maybe a follow-up question, is, as we talk to leaders of support raisers, like, what might you encourage them to think about as they write newsletter policies? And, like, we generally, agencies have a way that they communicate. Like, what would you encourage them to think about differently, or maybe just evaluate in their practices as they lead people because of these engagement data points?
Right. I think the main thing is put the prayer needs front and center. Like, that's what supporters have been telling us for 12 years. They've been telling us this, right? Like, this has not changed. If you take a look at like the anatomy of a typical, newsletter, some pictures at the top,
Mhm.
maybe a banner, some stories, family update, and then at the bottom, like maybe 5 bullet points of prayer, right? And so like if the prayer aspect is what people care about the most and what draws them into the ministry the most, why is that not at the very top? You know? Um, Another way of kind of thinking about kind of that question is around, and I find this really challenging even when I ask myself this, right? Like, what do I believe would have the greatest impact on my ministry? 10 times the funding, 10 times the ministry hours, or 10 times the prayer, right? Like, that's a hard question.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons it's really hard, like, and they're not mutually exclusive by any means, but it's really easy to look at your bank balance, and to
Mhm.
see that it's like going down. You're like, oh my gosh, like I need that for my ministry. It's also easy to feel like, oh, I have so much to do. I wish I had more time to like pour into these people who God has put into my life. It's much harder to understand and to discern, like, oh, what is the impact of not spending as much time cultivating prayer support as spending that time cultivating financial support or thinking about ministry planning, you know, kind of putting my hand to the plow. And so I think, in the same way that I'm challenged by that, for leaders and organizations, if you take a look, for instance, at like the training curriculum, right? Like how much time and emphasis is spent on prayer raising versus fundraising, right? When you teach people to do um, communications via newsletter, like what is the template that you use? Where are the prayer requests in that, right? What are the expectations that you're setting around things like frequency? Because the thing about prayer requests is they happen at a much faster frequency oftentimes than what people are sending in terms of newsletters, right? And people want to
Yeah.
hear what God is doing. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think those are some of kind of my immediate thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I mean, you pointed out that prayer is the most strategic thing, and it doesn't show up as often on the intentional things we ask missionaries to do. No, we do say that in boot camp, like you should spend time praying about, like, we say, but we don't train it. Like we maybe even assume that missionaries coming in maybe know already, like we might assume too much maybe about what that's like for them. And you're causing me really to think about this stuff. So I super appreciate it. But that's really significant.
Yeah, let me give you like a specific example, right? Um, a friend of mine, he does work with underground believers in the Middle East. And a few years ago, he started using Prayvine. He's just like, oh, you're telling me I need to send short prayer requests in real time and let people know how God answered. So he started doing that, right? And his ministry totally changed. And he came back to me. He's like, Ian, I have an analogy for you. Imagine that you are a commander in World War II, right? And an officer comes in running into your office and he has two telegrams. One telegram says something like, we are under heavy fire. We're trying to take enemy ground at 0500 tomorrow. Heavy casualties expected. Please provide air cover, right? That's it. The
Mhm.
other telegram says, I'm sorry it's been so long since I communicated, but we've been doing all this stuff, right? And like we've seen God do this and this and this. And then it's very long at the bottom. There are a couple like, oh, could you please send us this, right? Like I found that analogy so powerful. The
Yeah.
war front telegram is what conveys. The other thing is the war front telegram. It demystifies the work of the missionary, and I think like
Yeah.
a lot of times that that's one of the key reasons people like say it's important to send newsletters, right? Because it's hard to understand what
Hmm.
a missionary does. I
Yeah.
believe that asking for prayer communicates that more efficiently than anything else, right? Because you're like, oh, he meets with people. Oh, he prepares Bible, lessons, or she does counseling or whatever. And so, um, yeah, I just found that to be a really helpful analogy when he shared that with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's super clear about which one people are going to engage with and why they would engage with it because it feels more urgent, right? Um, yeah. And I also, I mean, I would bet, and you tell me, I would bet you're not saying don't use newsletters. You're saying
No,
send
no.
prayer requests more.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Like if you feel like you only have time to do one or the
Yes.
other, like prioritize prayer requests, right? But like I said in the beginning, giving testimony to what God is doing, like raising up praise, like that goes hand in hand with raising up prayer. And newsletters can be an amazing way of kind of going deep and,
Hmm.
giving that testimony so God receives praise and honor and glory. So, yeah, by all means, like both are very important.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Great. Thanks. I mean, I knew you would say, I just wanted to make sure our audience, and kind of heard that. So, yeah, thanks. Well, let's transition. You know, it's probably common that some people feel like it's challenging to communicate well with people, or maybe struggle to write or articulate what's going on. Like, what have you observed that makes communication challenging, and like, what are some things that people can do to kind of help, take steps towards communicating better?
Right. That's a great question. So when it's very common among missionaries, like to communicating is in some ways the easiest thing to procrastinate because like the urgency of the of the ministry need isn't as in your face, right? Like you're surrounded by people who don't know Jesus,
Right.
and like that, you see that and you want, like, that's where your heart is drawn. That's why God's called you there. And so it's easy to put off um, communicating. And I think a sense of busyness, um, yeah, missionaries have so much to do,
Hmm.
and it's really hard. I believe that part of what will make communicating easier is having a really clear understanding of the impact that prayer in particular can make on your work, as in having the faith to believe that God will work through that prayer and that God wants to work through your partners, right? Like, I think having that clarity around the impact that prayer makes is huge. Another side of that is I think sometimes people have a hard time communicating because they might feel like, oh, I don't have anything like big to report, right? Like it can take a long time before you start seeing fruitfulness on the field. Like there are lots of ups and downs, and like if someone's in a season of support raising, like I get asked this question, like, what can I share about besides, please pray for my support raising, right? And I think there the question is, do I believe that I am worth my partner's time and attention? And do I believe that in the mundane stuff, God is showing up and God is needed, right? So it can be as simple as, God showed me this Bible verse this morning. Can you please pray this verse for me? Because it really spoke to my heart. And by the way, I'm praying this for you too, right? This is like a two-way thing. We're also praying for our partners. Um, and again, God is present in all these things in the language learning, right? Like I'm having a hard time learning how to conjugate this thing, and I have a test coming up and I'm nervous about it. And being clear, like if God answers prayers for me to be able to conjugate this verb, that will allow me to present the gospel in a way that speaks to people's heart better, right? And so I think seeing the link between the mundane stuff now, how God can use that, how God will use that. And communicating both those things is really powerful. One template that that I think is helpful is, please pray for me at this time. I am going to blank. If God answers this prayer, this will happen, right? Thank you for praying. That's it. I think that is extremely powerful, motivating, and encouraging to us as the worker too, right? To reflect on, wow, this stuff that we're doing is hard, but if God, if he shows up and if he answers people's prayer, like, wow, that's going to pay off for the kingdom. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So I heard a couple of things in there that let me just make sure I heard correctly. But one is understanding that God cares enough about you to answer the everyday needs. Like, he says, give us this day our daily bread, right? Like, I think that's where you're headed with that. And believing that as a core belief, like that's something for all of us to pay attention to. Because sometimes and the other thing you said, I thought that was of great value, is, am I worth my partner's time? Like I think sometimes I'm interfering or intruding, and that's significant. Like those two things were huge. And then the last thing I heard that was super practical, and it reminded me of two instances today. So one of my friends lost his job. He's got an interview at 2:30. He said, will you pray for me at 2:30 today? So right when we started, the podcast, I just remembered to throw up a prayer. But my son has an interview at 3. So you mentioned at this time, this thing. So those were some really great tips, Ian. I really liked all of those. That's really helpful. Yeah, really good. But I'm wondering for leaders, maybe there's a part of like teaching those first two concepts, that God cares about the little things and that you are worthy. Yeah, you are worthy. You are worthy of investment. And that's hard for us to believe sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, to put it in very stark terms, right? Like, God sent his only son, Jesus Christ, to save the entire world. Like, it's too small a thing for, him to send Jesus for people to be like comfortable Christians or whatever. Like, and he has called you to represent that to the world in some way. Like, that is worthy of time and attention. Yeah. And it is a blessing for your supporters. I mean, it is such a blessing when they see God answer their prayers. It is, yeah. Like, I have a friend, he told me, like, yeah, when I go in a fundraising meeting, and this applies to prayer raising as well, like, yeah, my attitude in my heart is like, you're welcome, right? Like, I've come to you with this opportunity because God is amazing and we get to be a part of it. And I think the same thing is so true of every single person who's been called and, who's made great sacrifices to walk in obedience to God. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Super. Can you tell us a little bit about how to think about or choose which technology or platforms that we might communicate on? And I'm sure there's some that I'm sure there's a spectrum, right? Like of what uses well and what's good. And especially, in such a variety of missionaries too, whether they're in closed countries or maybe, anyway, I'd love to hear kind of what you've learned.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And we live in an amazing time with amazing technologies that can help us connect with prayer partners and ministry partners so much better and more immediately than in the past. Before I get to the actual, this is what you should consider when selecting a technology or a platform, I want to say that there are kind of two key things that are really helpful to keep in mind, right? The first is having a good practice to set expectations with your ministry partner around your communication. I think that's something that we don't talk a lot about, but people are very sensitive, can be very sensitive to receiving stuff in their email or their text messages that they don't feel like they've signed up for. Yes. Right. And so I think spending the time up front with people saying, hey, I'm putting together a small team of people who are willing to pray for me frequently. When God is on the move, I might share, like every day, but this is so important to me. Will you be a part of that? And if they say yes, then you have a lot of freedom to to communicate with them. And so and when you set that expectation, that is a good time also to ask the question, well, how would you like me to communicate with you? Right? And then the second thing, of course, is understanding the goal of communication, because what your goal is, can shape the platform that you use,
Sure.
right? So like some goals can be achieved better, like through video or through imagery, right? Other goals can be achieved more efficiently through like text, right? And so like understanding your goals helps. But all that said, I think there are a few dimensions that are helpful in thinking through which specific technology or platform you use. I think the first is friction, right? And friction on both sides. Friction for you, how much time and effort is required for you to get something out? Can you, if you're at an airport gate and about to leave for an important trip, does that platform allow you to send a message asking for prayer, right? Like some platforms are good at that, some platforms are not. The other side of that is friction for your partners. And different partners in different parts of the world have, are accustomed to different amounts of friction, right? Like I met a missionary once. He told me, yeah, when I come back from the field on furlough, every time I meet with one of my supporters, I take their phone, because they tend to be older, and I install WhatsApp on their phone, and then I add them to a private WhatsApp group, because you have to like have a friend connection in order to have a private group where everything isn't reply all, which is kind of, and so all that to say, like, there are different types of friction. Does someone have to install an app?
Yep.
Another type of friction is how much noise is there in that channel. So like one of the problems with WhatsApp, specifically, is once it scales past a certain number of people, it gets super noisy because it's reply all the time. And so understanding friction, whether you want one-to-many or one-to-one conversations, that will shape your choice of technology. And then the two other things I would say, dimensions to think through, are, first of all, security and privacy is extremely important, right? So like, and that's where speaking with the IT team of your organization to, craft policy around that is so essential. And I would say that is not only relevant to those who work in sensitive contexts, because technology makes it so that like the world is so small now. If someone is doing campus ministry in Texas, they're probably working with international students, some of whom are like, from, families who would persecute them severely if they saw, a photo on Facebook of them at like a Christian gathering, right? And so that's another dimension to think through. And then the final one is just feedback. Like, how much feedback does the channel provide, and how easy is it for you to see, is someone praying, or, how helpful is that information versus an open rate versus something else? And so I will say that we have done surveys, and people still like to receive email, which is weird, right? Like, it is true that text messaging is getting more noisy as well. And so that's just something you have to contend with. And this kind of goes back to the point about like warfront telegrams, right? Like keeping it short, keeping it actionable, making it clear, like what God will accomplish, and sharing frequently enough. I think in this day and age, no matter what channel you use, right? Like an app, email, Facebook, chances are most of your partners are not going to see each and every single one of your communications. So you should have enough communications so that if they only see half of them, they have an idea of what you're doing, and and they're able to participate kind of in your ministry. So yeah, I'm happy to like talk about this at more length with individuals, but it really depends on where people are, kind of the nature of their relationships with their supporters. But if you think about friction, security and privacy, and like feedback, those should kind of point you in the right direction.
Yeah, that was gold. I mean, obviously the theological stuff at the beginning was supreme, but this part in terms of actionable, as these leaders take this, they've got some ways to assess what they're doing. And I was going to ask you a different question. I don't know how to put you on the spot, but I was going to say, what are some? I mean, maybe we don't have a ton of time, but like, if you were going to give them some suggestions of what to refine just in their communication practices. You gave a few earlier, but I heard you say short and frequency. And one of the things I see a ton of is, 3-page emails or, like PDFs that are in a WhatsApp group that are just really long. Like, as you're teaching people to communicate, what would you help these leaders think about?
Yeah, so absolutely, like timely and to the point, concise is critical. We've run analysis of prayer requests sent through Prayvine, and we've mapped out like engagement as a function of word length, right? Word
Wow.
count, and the optimal spot is about between 150 to maybe 200 words, 220 words, which equals about 1 minute of attention for
Wow.
most readers, right? And then you tend to see quite a drop off after that. For most people, both email and text is kind of like a work channel, right? Like in email, people are like just kind of processing, processing, trying to get to inbox zero. And so if there's something short and actionable and they can just click a button to let you know they pray or something, then like that works very well within that channel. But like if you expect them to read, and we've seen 12,000 word prayer like updates and prayer requests, and there's a time and a place for that as well, right? Because there are some times when what God is doing requires unpacking, because otherwise people won't understand and be able to pray, kind of in that specific way. But I think short, concise, and then the other thing is honest and vulnerable. I think a lot of times we're as workers, we can feel kind of afraid of showing our weakness because we're dependent on people for kind of for funds, right? To be able to do our ministry. And the interesting thing that I've found is that when people are vulnerable in sharing and direct and honest, the response definitely goes up, right? Like when I share with my partners that I'm anxious or that I'm scared, people will reply back and tell me, "Hey, I feel the same thing," right? Like, and then we can have a conversation. We can pray about it, and like our relationship grows. And so, yeah, being able to express like it, and I think it's appropriate. Paul expresses all sorts of emotions in his letters, and the work that we're doing is of such priority and importance that it would be strange for us not to feel under attack or scared or concerned or anxious, right? And so I think that's the other thing is, the mask doesn't help you. The mask doesn't help your supporters. God is the one who brings light to things, and as He brings light to places, like that's where healing and growth and kind of God's work really can take root.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Ian, for your investment today. Thanks for sharing what you know with these leaders, and all for the glory, right? For the glory of the Lord, to connect more people, to have more engagement. If they would like to know more about you or Prayvine, should they go to prayvine.org?
Yep, they can go to prayvine.org. They can email me directly. Like, at the end of the day, the product that I care about is not Prayvine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if someone uses some other platform or email or is, sending paper letters, if they're being prayed for, like, I win, right? Like, the
Right.
kingdom wins. And so, however I can be helpful to anyone, and yeah, sometimes, Prayvine isn't the best for
Yeah.
in many situations. And so, but I want to be a resource. I want to, be as helpful as I can, both to individuals as well as to organizations, because organizations have a different view of things, and how organizational culture and practices can influence change across lots and lots of missionaries is really quite important. And I'm happy to talk about those things. And so my email address is ian@prayvine.org, ian@prayvine.org. Shoot me an email. Let's talk.
Great. Thanks for your kingdom perspective and your humility. We appreciate what you're doing. Thanks so much. Hey, thanks guys for listening. Another great podcast by Ian, and I hope it serves you well. We'll see you next time.